And we're back and moving along with our modeling process for the torso. I did get a question from Lawrence who asked if you're adding something like a gun, holster, for example, or a backpack, would you add a brand new object to the character or build that into the character model itself? For me, that's situationally dependent. If I'm doing a low-resolution game model, and I mean these days low resolution is kind of an interesting thing, and if I knew that that particular prop was going to be a part of that model at all times, meaning it's not like some extra equipable piece of something that will be, you know, there 1 minute and gone the next, then I might just model it right in. Same thing with a character. You know, if with something like in a 3D render, if I know that if I know that that particular piece is always going to be on this character at all times, and it's very snug fitting, and I don't need to worry about showing a lot of detail in the gaps between where that backpack or holster actually touches the body, then I might just model it in. But again, it's very, very situationally dependent. It depends on how much detail I need, on what's going to happen, what the future of the character is, whether that thing that I'm adding is permanent or temporary. So you just have to take a lot of things into account. That's where planning comes in, though. Okay, so I'm trying not to allow myself to get too carried away with the tweaking process, but it's difficult. So I'm going to do a few things here. Let's make an indentation for the spine, and I'll just start off by kind of eyeballing it. So we'll pull these in a little. We'll start to kind of let it flatten out and become a neck a little later. Pull that up and in. Pull this in. And then we can start kind of adjusting the shape to form the backside a little bit. Just need to check and see what that's looking like. Now, some of these, and this is just something that I run into a lot with the crotch or the groin area, whatever you guys want to call it. I will often end up taking my edges that flow down through here and I'll anchor them off so they don't wrap all the way around. Just because I often find that there's just too much geometry crushed way too close together and it's way too easy to get pinching. So I often will collapse something down, but we'll worry about that more when we get down to modeling out the legs and whatnot. So for now I'll keep things vaguely simple. Add just a couple of edges here, just so that I can put in just a little bit of rounding. Okay. Now, just kind of moving out up and down in kind of both directions here, cleaning up various detail. Now, just looking at the back, if I jump back out to object mode, I mean, we're getting something that is starting to do the job reasonably well. It's also a good idea to occasionally look at your model like this. I mean, we've got enough detail now where we can start pulling the cage out and start lining some things up in terms of the drawing. So now would be a good time to do that. So let's go ahead and tackle some of that action. Now notice I'm not just grabbing the outermost edge. I'm also grabbing some of the inner vertices as well and turning this into a bit of a multi-vertex job, if you will. And probably flatten this area out just a little bit. grab these edges in particular and slide them up a little ways. Smooth this out a little bit. Now, for creating the base of the hip, where we're going to be pulling out a leg, there are a couple of different sort of methodologies that you can go with. We could, for instance, grab this edge loop and just kind of start by extruding it out. I mean, that already kind of starts to look a little vaguely leg-like, and I've used that several times, and that actually works. Another way is to grab just, you'll notice we have this kind of change in topology right about here, would be to grab these edges and start to pull them out as an extrusion like a skirt and weld them back in. And in my opinion, there's really, I don't know of a significant benefit to one over the other. It's really just one of those matter of preference and kind of what you get used to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here, and I want to go ahead and start building the hip. So I'll just extrude this out just a little bit. We're not going very far at all. And we can go ahead and start working on how that will flow into the glutes and then become the hip itself. And pardon me for just a second, everyone. Okay, so
Fox attack.
it was something. There was something I had to go check on real quick. All right, so I'm going to keep these really close as we get to the inside of the thigh. And let's go ahead and check out the front view. Actually, incidentally, that's flowing along fairly nicely. Now, we do kind of need to tighten up what's going on in here. Let me turn off the smooth model, switch over to X-ray, just kind of start pulling these in. And so we've got some edges here that are in kind of a straight line. We've got some pointiness taking place as well, which I'd rather kind of avoid at this stage. So we'll pull this forward and create a little bit of rounding. Tuck this back a little bit. And that'll start to get that nice crease in between the groin area and the thigh, which is really nice. Now, all of this geometry that we're making right now, every single bit of it, just understand, is completely subject to change. Nothing that we're doing right now is locked in stone at all. No decisions are final. So later on, once we get to the point where we're actually making a leg, we may decide, you know, I want a different number of edges, or I want these edges to be laid out differently. And that's one of the great things, ever since BMesh was implemented. Actually, I'm going to undo that, excuse me. Ever since BMesh was implemented, where we can just cut in some detail and then make it work. And that's very, very useful. Let's see. I can't really lose that. What I may end up doing is merging some detail in toward the center of the spine so it doesn't flow all the way down the leg. Starting to do some crazy things with topology, but let me start here. I'm just going to add another edge right here down the side of the character. We'll pull that out slightly.
Apparently, making Blender even better was Wolf Knightley's idea.
Oh, good job, Wolf Knightley. I imagine that's a good idea to have. Let's see. I think you should contact the Blender Foundation. Let me think. Because we could make a couple of transitions here if we just really, really wanted to. And get kind of an interesting anatomical feature in place where as you get higher up in the spine, particularly with with skinny people, but this is true of everybody to some greater or lesser degree, the spine, though it may be recessed in between the back muscles, actually does protrude a little bit. So we could start to indent these edges in through here.
Around about the 7th cervical vertebra.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of someone with a long history of osteopathy. Oh, I've had so many back problems over the years.
Oh, yeah? Alright, now let's turn this off. I mean, I like where we're going, but we could keep the edges flowing at least a little bit in some direction. Okay, now, all that done, still probably have too much detail actually in this area, but we'll tackle that when the time is right, and right now I don't think the time is right. So let's see, let's go back out to object mode for a minute. I'm feeling, let me do a couple of things real quick. Let's hit T and let's smooth this out. And we need to tackle some problems with the geometry. Notice we get this strange ridge running down the center of the belly, and that's all just going to be because of the vertices. We need to clean that up. That would be because we've got this little bit of pointiness here. And instead of pulling just those vertices back, we probably ought to start pulling these forward and start rounding like that.
I still can't get fixed in my head which way the stack, which is the front of the stack and which is the back of the stack for Blender.
Eh? What do you mean?
Modifier stack.
Oh.
Does it go top to bottom or bottom to top? I can never remember.
Top to bottom. This first, then this.
Okay. Thank you.
Which you can kind of tell because that's the way they get added when you're putting them on. So let me...
Yes, just
yeah,
multi-app confusion.
Oh, I totally understand. Totally understand. Okay, that's definitely looking quite a bit nicer. Now, we also have some room for a little bit of vanity shaping. Not that we need to do a lot of this with a character like this. This is a pretty stylized set of proportions and whatnot. But if you wanted to get a little bit of indentation, say at the rib cage, we could start pulling some of these edges a little bit closer together. And then maybe pull these down a little bit and start simulating some of that pinching. Now, it's not something that's going to show up very well in the image plane, but I mean, if we know that it's there and we want to kind of recreate it, then we can. And you can kind of rotate your view around over on this side and see how it's affecting the surface. Just use that specular highlight to your advantage. Gavin, I believe you're getting a grammar police question over in BuzzNut.
Oh, am I? No, because... No, well, scapula is single, scapulae is therefore the plural, not scapulas. One scapula, many scapulae.
Okay.
No, not crazy. Latin. But it's a bit stadium, stadia.
And for those of you following along at home using the videos, there's apparently a nice discussion going on about the pronunciation of various Latin words, which is always going to get Gavin excited.
Ah, sorry, Wolf. I assumed that you'd put in a grocer's apostrophe. Yes. But that would be belonging to both of them. And I've said it so many times now, I can't remember which bone it is. Scapula. That's kneecap, isn't it? No.
That's the patella. The scapula, I believe, is your shoulder blade.
Shoulder blade. Wow.
Okay, now this is where we get to have a little bit of fun and do a couple of slightly unorthodox things, because I am going to make a triangle now. But it's being created kind of at the inside of the thigh, where it's not really going to do a significant amount of damage to anybody. So let's just grab this and this. I mean, if I change my mind, I can always undo it later. That's the beauty of the whole thing. Grab these two and I'll merge them as well.
MMO dust. Is it that part of your model is smooth and part of it is faceted? Because if that's the case, you just need to select everything and hit smooth shading over in the T menu.
Or it could be that you've messed your normals up somehow.
It could well be, yes. In which case, control
do it. Let's see here. I would probably be interested in focusing on this crease at the front of the model, right here where the thigh meets the torso. And I just don't have what I would consider a nice layout of detail to really make that happen. So, I mean, if I hit Control R, we get a nice kind of wraparound. I mean, if I just throw that in real quick just as a check, that's really not bad as a place to begin. So let me see about what I can do with this. So let's grab edges here and edge slide these down ways. Let me turn off smoothing. It's just getting in my way right now. And you're probably going to have to do something kind of fancy with the geometry right in here. Which is okay. Fanciful geometry is my forte. Okay, that's all kind of working. Go ahead and give myself some more room down the side of the leg here. Switch over to the side view. And obviously we need to kind of start condensing some things in and getting away from worrying about the curvature of her backside, because you notice we're really far behind on the hips. I thought things were starting to look a little bit funny, and now I've had that confirmed, which is really good. Let me undo a little bit. I'm not pleased with that. So we got to do a little bit of technical problem solving. I didn't get to go as far back as I wanted to before I ran out of undos, which is really no big deal to me. Yes, Gavin?
Select the edge loop. I was going to say, if you want to select that edge loop and then exhale it.
That's all I'm going to do. That's all I'm going to do.
But,
yes?
No, I'm just waiting to see what's going to be left.
Oh, yes. Well, you generally don't want to do that, so let me just go ahead and dissolve it the old way. Or delete edge loop. Alright. Well, the reason I did that is because I want to kind of come over here to the side and focus on the shape of the hip, and we had a nice anchor point a minute ago for that. So we're going to have to start doing some of this. And then pulling these up. so that we're flowing along the shape of the hip. We're also missing the hip here. So here's how I'm going to handle this. I'm just going to go ahead and overshoot the geometry and fix it later. So I'm just going to assume that this edge that I'm working on right now, being as this continues, you see, this is going to need to form the hip. So I'll just pull this all the way around, and I'll worry about cleaning it up here in just a moment. You see we got like this edge loop that's going straight up, and that's going to be a little problematic. We need something that goes across here. Getting the curvature for the backside just right is going to be kind of a problem at this stage. But what we want to do, the method to my madness here, is just to focus on making a shape that looks like a nice sort of a, I guess, kind of like a jogging suit, like a spandex running suit now. So I'll get the shorts kind of starting to move down just a little bit at this stage. And this is one of those places where what I'll do is I'll just start nuking any geometry that so much as looks at me funny. If I have the slightest problem with anything that's going on, I'm just going to start blowing stuff up, and then I'll just fix it later. So like here, I don't like that this edge is going way up here into outer space. And I'm thinking that probably the way I'm going to approach this is just to grab edge, 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 and edge, and just X and delete that. Ooh, I didn't want to actually delete it out that far. So let's try edge and dissolve. Now that's going to leave some floating vertices. You just kind of have to know that. So let's go behind and we'll clean those up. It's there, and X, and just dissolve those out as well. Edge, dissolve, vertex, dissolve. So we've got some five-sided faces, finally. That we get to play with. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking over at Buzz.
No,
there
I'm
for a
laughing
minute.
at that as well.
Yeah, so you just did more work so you could do less work. I mean, sort of. Again, this is a really artistic process, and generally I do a lot of back and forth as to how I think something needs to be laid out. So in this case, what I've got is enough detail to start getting the shape that I want, but it's not what I would call super quality detail in terms of its flow. So that's okay. What I do is I just nuke out anything that I don't think is flowing properly, and I will go through and adjust its flow using my modeling tools. For instance, like this edge here, watch this. We're going to nuke this edge. And I'm going to take its little associating vertex right there, and we'll nuke that as well. Let's pull this vertex back a little bit, kind of further down the shape. Then if I get the knife tool out, we can cut this right across the side of the hip, basically redirecting that detail. Now we do have to be careful. Fortunately, this anchors off to a triangle here, otherwise we'd be in danger of a spiraling situation. But I actually don't like how the triangle is working right this second. So I'm going to end up cleaning that up here in just a moment as well. But this will work out very nicely for giving me plenty of detail to round out the transition from the hip to the leg. So what I'm going to do is leave this final cut anchored right here, and I'll just deal with that in a minute. So just kind of like a one thing at a time, one crime at a time sort of approach. So now I see we can pull these out. And if we take a look at our smooth version for just a moment, we're starting to get some nice curvature right there at the back of the hip. Since we're at the topic of the groinular area, is there anything special you need to consider with male groin, hips, thighs, topology, edge flow compared to a female? If you're building a mesh in this sort of unitard style, not really. If you need a little bit more, and I'll just use the term very loosely, if you need a little bit more of a bulge there at the front of the groin, you can just add an extra edge loop and pull that forward a little bit, or you may already have plenty of detail depending on how much smoothing you have in place. Generally, though, I don't think you need to worry too much about it. Wolf Knightley wanted to clarify, I guess, says, yeah, I mean, if you didn't do that adjusting with less edges to work with, then you would end up having to move a lot of other edges, and it would end up taking time. So it's actually better to just nuke them and start over, even though at first it seems like nuking them and having to work it over would be more work. Yes. We'll just go with that.
Beautifully put.
Yes. And we can go ahead and pull this up a little bit as well. Pull it out a little bit for some rounding. I feel like what we're probably going to end up having to do is pull this up even higher. And I'm kind of destroying the shape right now, but we'll get back to fixing it in a moment. Because essentially, we've got to get the her backside pretty much rounded out and then back down to a pair of hips by the time we get to this crease. We kind of decided that this edge essentially represents where the legs begin. Now, one thing we can do that's a very nifty trick and just involves destroying some more detail, which is always fun, right? The way we had this edge kind of flowing across here, I can, alternatively, we can nuke that. Nuke this as well. And if all this nuking is frustrating, if you're like, oh, I just want things to be, you know, right the first time, don't ever become a modeler. Ever. So let's cut this right across the front. Like, well, I'm so used to hitting right mouse from...
yeah, I do with that tool.
So many tools. I'm not entirely sure why they decided not to do that, but whatever. And then we can split that through here. And yeah, we've got a triangle here. We can solve it, or we can not. It's just going to create a little bit of pinching, and really, right there in that spot, a little bit of pinching may be perfectly ideal. So, right this minute, not going to stress it. And then this gives us the opportunity to clean up our topology a little bit through here.
If you were to take that row that you just moved up and move it down instead, you could run an edge off the back of the triangle around there.
Yeah, that's such an interesting deformation. I mean, that to me, that's just you. That's somebody going, "Oh my God, I have a triangle," and I'm about to drink Drano because I have a triangle. I just think like what that's going to end up with is a piece of geometry that's pulled off in a really weird angle.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I mean, I wouldn't necessarily do that, but I'm not going to, you know, like smack your hand and tell you you're a bad person for thinking that way. I mean, that could very well work out nicely for you. I just wouldn't do it.
Okay.
Let's see, I can't really go much further there, but I can cheat and cut that over manually. Finish it off with the knife tool. I mean, if that triangle is really killing us at some point, we can fix it. We can make that go away in a lot of
pretty
ways.
much, yeah, exactly. Any of those three directions would provide potentially usable,
right,
or potentially useful geometry, wouldn't it?
Let's see here. I do kind of want to pull some of this geometry either out or separate it a little bit. It's like, I like how this edge is giving me a little more detail here at the belly, but it's just getting too much here at the hip. We're just ending up with too much here. So what I think I'm going to try, at least tentatively speaking, is to just pull this out entirely. And I'm just going to see if I can make the geometry work without that, because it's one of those things where adding in an edge loop is so trivial that sometimes you can, you know, if you decide you're like, oh, I guess I shouldn't have got rid of that, I'll just hit Control-R and throw it right back in. Oh, Wick, I didn't even know you were here, man. Okay, so that's flowing along reasonably well. This is already, see, the issue that I'm running into is that this front edge is already technically running down the front of the hip, while this back here really isn't running down the back of it. So I'm a little bit in two different places here. I'm not going to let myself get too stressed about that, though.
Did you put that pentagon there?
I did. Yes,
Lovely.
yes, that's right there. I'm well aware of that pentagon. I'm thinking. That's all I'm doing, just thinking. So I may end up pulling this down just a little bit further, which means I'm going to have to double check the front view again, which is fine. I can handle that. And now we can get kind of from the back end and make that sort of outline her backside, because now it's starting to turn into more kind of like a pair of briefs. I think we're getting really close to where we want to be here. In terms of this, I feel like we could probably just nuke it out, but I'm going to try pulling this down, and then we'll pull this in and down. Pull this down. And then we can just knife tool straight over. Because we're bound to have 5 quads come together wherever there's a leg. Generally, I'll have one at the front and one at the back. It's just the one at the back right now has been solved out more as a triangle. And the reason it's a triangle is that it's kind of helping me more clearly define that crease between the body and the thigh, which feels maybe a little bit severe to me. That might need to be kind of lessened a tad, so I need to kind of check that out in the front view. Yeah, that needs to be pulled way down. So let's take a look at adjusting that, which should be a pretty... It's a trivial process. It's just pushing and pulling a whole bunch of vertices. Which, that's another one of those things where if you're just like, oh, I just feel like all I'm doing is pushing and pulling vertices, don't be a modeler.
Yeah, welcome to...
Yeah, now that is
what
all.
you do.
Yeah, that is all modeling is. The parts where you're like, oh, I get to use all the cool tools. That moment is over way too quickly. Outside of
that is just the setup stage mainly. After that, you're
just pushing and pulling vertices for the rest of your life, really.
And if they ever did come out with an app that meant you could use tools to do that bit properly, then you would be irrelevant to the process.
Yeah.
You would just feed it image planes, and it would spit out a 3D.
Which I'm sure is probably on the way in some form or fashion.
Well, we were promised, I'm sure we were in the 80s, we were promised, holographic modeling things by now.
Most surely.
Same company that apparently made CDs that don't scratch.
Yes, of course. Alright, that's all lining up pretty well.
Any more than a handful's a sprained thumb.
Oh, can we not?
That's the only good line in that film. It's an appalling film.
Well,
that's the only good line in it.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got those going to a triangle there at the base of the thigh. That's, again, that doesn't really bug me very much. It does keep things from spiraling. I'll probably end up solving that a little more closely once we get to creating the leg, which isn't for at least another, half a session or so. Let's kind of move away from all that, though. We've been working down there in that area for so long. We're going to pull back and take a look at the spine. Now, I am keeping the back fairly simple in terms of overall anatomy, but you can do some things like make a little bit of pinching here to start creating the illusion of some shoulder blades. You don't want it to go too far. I mean, you don't want it to break your image planes, but as you can see here, we've got a little ways we can go. before we have to worry about any of that, and that's a little bit severe, so I'm going to switch over to faces, and we'll pull this out just a little ways. Switch over to edges, grab this edge, and pull this. Well, try to pull this out, but hit the wrong button and try to, I think, rotate it instead. And let's see here, we could probably also, if we're just trying to be clever, we could pull a little bit of detail forward and make another little extra S-curve there and start to suggest hip bones. You just really wanted to do that. Now, let's see here. Next, let me go ahead and turn off smoothing real quick. If I really wanted to kind of clean this area up, but still let it do what it's supposed to do, let me try something real quick. I don't know how well this is going to work, but, you know, I'm all about just grabbing hammers and banging on my model. So, I make a terrible photographer, I guess. Let's go ahead and just hit X and just nuke out these faces. Oh, this is like the worst joke I've told all day. You should be ashamed if you laughed at that.
I was laughing with pity.
Ah, yes. Yes, that's probably good.
And in the full knowledge it was still better than any of the ones in my head.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of pity,
Oh! That's just cold, man.
Come on, you walked full face, like, right into it. I didn't even have to try. You basically handed me that. Okay, now I'm going to put those back in for just a second. I'm just trying to decide if I want to change this up, and I'm of a couple of different minds of it. And I do really, really hope that the fact that I am having to stop and contemplate approaches does not frustrate people, because if you were hoping that I was going to come in here with like a step-by-step process for modeling out a character, well, I'm not.
Yes, because we can input positions with the numbers.
Yeah.
Step 1, place this vertex at.
Yeah, that won't help anybody. Well, see, that's exactly what I'm getting to, Wolf, but thank you for asking. Let's see. What I'm trying to do really is see if there's a nice way that I can consider transitioning out this triangle. And I may not stress it. It's not causing really...
Well, should I throw out how I do it, and then you can shoot me down?
Sure. Why don't you throw out how you do it, Gavin?
I take the vertical edge of that triangle and the two below it.
I could actually argue that all three of these edges are vertical.
Yeah, okay. The one that is closest to your cursor at the moment, I would take the two edges below that and edge slide them outwards, and then insert another edge vertically. But I haven't done a count on your leg.
Oh, I'm not worried about counts. I can always condense that down when you get halfway down the leg. So yeah, I never stress that kind of thing this early on in the game. Because often what I'll do is I'll just build a leg that looks nice and then be like, okay, now I've got this discrepancy in the leg. I've got 15 edges that have to go to 8. Yeah. Bevel, hide some stuff at the kneecap, or just go from there. And I see what you're saying, but I'm not feeling it. I'm just not feeling it.
Okay.
So what I may end up doing, let me try this. Let's do it the old-fashioned way for just a second. Let's go to X, dissolve. X, dissolve. I'll just start here. And now with that done, we should be able to maybe pull this up a little bit, pull this over. We are going from 3 in this direction. We're going from 3 right now down to 2. And I don't even want to think about that, really. So let's just keep on with our pattern. And I'm just going to dissolve these guys out, too. I love N-Gons. I love the fact that I can make them anyway. Okay, now I feel like we're getting somewhere. Because now I could grab the knife tool and solve that right across there. I can solve this one right across here. We could break off in this direction if we really thought we had to. Let's see real quick. Let me jump over to the front view. And where's that edge coming in for the hips? It should be right about here. So let's go ahead and make sure that I have that detail lined up. Okay. And we'll reshape this stuff out. Okay, I'm going to undo that. Edges, U, X, dissolve back to an N-Gon for just a moment. Okay, so I can't move these. Basically this edge here is more or less locked down. Now, I mean, I wouldn't mind going ahead while we've got it as a nice N-Gon and just smoothing it out just a little bit. Now, an easy-ish approach would be to just start slicing straight down as a way to begin. And like I said, that's probably a good place to begin. Another way, since we're getting, well, we can go ahead and just take a moment, and since we're exploring this, we might as well explore it right. Let's go ahead and round that out. Now we just need to focus on the edges that are starting to wrap around. And we'll still consider that locked down. I can run these down the inside of the thigh. I'm still not completely terrified of having a triangle. I just kind of want it to be, if I have one, I'd like it to be closer to the inside of the thigh. The more you can push triangles kind of up here into this area, the more they'll disappear and never cause any problems for you. And we can go ahead and spread this out. Yes, Gavin.
Does anyone happen to know if there's a lock 3D cursor button or hotkey?
I don't know. If there is, I never used it.
I think my control key's on the way out.
Ah.
And consequently, when I go to control right click, I end up moving the cursor and it's starting to irritate me.
Ah, I see. Let's see here, if I cut this down through, basically makes that into a quad. Pulls out a triangle there, but I mean, you know. So we can temporarily solve it all out like this, right? Are you going to hit that edge for me? Thank you. Okay, so I mean that's a temporary fix, but obviously we have a spiraling problem where if we continued this pattern, we'd wrap all the way around the leg like a million times, and that's no good. So we don't want to do that. What we can probably do is perform a retransition, essentially just reroute this detail to just cross straight over the body, right about midway along the crotch. And the only question is where we'd actually like to do that. I mean, I'm thinking maybe right back here would be a good place, or maybe down here. And I'm going to start cleaning some of that. I just, my big kind of right now is I feel like we just got a whole lot of detail crammed right in here in this area that we don't necessarily need. And it's frustrating me a little bit.
It is probably the trickiest area on a human, I think, getting this whole thing, because you need so much geometry, so much more geometry to provide a nice rounded backside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
you've got to get rid of it somewhere.
Yeah, you basically have to start collapsing down edges somewhere along the way. Which, I mean, if I don't get this ironed out, that's fine, because, I mean, that's really, it's a bit of a leg solution more than anything else. So if I end up having to do that when we build the leg, that's not a problem. We've got the bulk of what I wanted to achieve today pretty much already done. Now it would just be a matter of gradually going across the surface, pushing and pulling vertices, constantly lining stuff up. I will give you guys my big tip of the day. Try, and it'll be hard at first, try not to get too caught up in an infinite tweaking loop, Gavin, because you'll constantly find that every single vertex just feels like it needs to be pulled this way and pulled that way and adjusted and readjusted and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked. And eventually you'll find that you've lost an entire day and you haven't really done anything except tweak a few vertices here and there. So, I'd advise you to watch out for that sort of thing, but it's bound to bite you sooner or later.
Hey, I'm nearly a third of the way through the front wing of this thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Nice job. Nice job.
It's only taken me, I think I've watched 4 baseball matches and all the way through this class as well.
You're watching baseball?
No, I've been modeling whilst watching baseball.
Yeah, that's what I asked you. You're watching baseball?
But not now.
Ah, okay. Well, there you go then.
I thought you meant you're watching baseball and the webinar.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Modeling. Yeah. No, I like baseball. I've watched baseball for years. But now I get to watch every game, which is great.
I mean, we could just do that, temporarily speaking, or maybe just go back one more edge before we do. So switch over to edges. I've already had those 3, but that's fine. Just maybe extrude them back. And then, I don't know, X, collapse, vertex, U, Alt-M at last. And that kind of merges those out. Because, I mean, you have to get rid of that detail somewhere. And that's such a nice, convenient place to do it because, well, let's face it, your camera is very likely not going there. And at this point, we could go ahead and start pulling these back out to the front of the hip. So that locks that edge down. So now it's just a matter of rotating around and cleaning up this detail so that it flows nicely with where that's supposed to be at this point.
What time's Maya today, by the way?
It's at 7, so I have to actually wrap up here in probably about 10 to 15 minutes. And I think this is a good enough sort of a start for the leg area. Again, I'm not too worried about getting it absolutely perfect until we get a little bit further along and start attaching the leg. You're going to find that it's a little bit difficult to get the shape looking just right when you have so little to work with. And that later on, as you start adding more and more to it, like again, once you have like a leg pulling out from this, you'll be able to say, oh, okay, now here's how we make this look a little bit more like, a left and a right buttock. But right now we just don't have a whole lot to blend into. So our goal is to get it close and reasonably readable, which it's pretty much there now, and then we can start building up from there. And of course a lot of this will get cleaned up once we add in a neck and an arm, because actually this area, as fun as it is, these transitions are one thing, but once we get up here we have dual transitions where we have to go to a neck and then we have to go out to an arm as well, and that can be a whole lot of fun. And now I did see a statement from MO Dust over in the in BuzzNet. He says, "I just can't get the butt to look like a butt." Well, don't be too alarmed by that. You will find, no matter what sex of humanoid you are modeling, that getting a backside to look like a backside can be a little bit of a pain. The first couple of times you do it. So really it's just a matter of being very patient with yourself primarily, and realizing that you are going to have to kind of work at this and kind of practice for a while to get things just right. What I may end up redoing, or may end up doing, I'll just say, I won't say redoing, before all is said and done, is I may end up taking a lot of this detail that we have and just running it right across the front face of the lower tummy and the groin area, so that we don't have to spiral down through here. But I'm not going to worry about that right now. I've already spent so much time on that. And that's something that we could readdress later on once we start attaching in the leg. Also, try to keep in mind when you do funny things for detailing, because like earlier, I was pulling these out to try to form some hip bones, just because it'd look neat. But it's easy to forget about that and be like, oh, my topology looks really weird here, and you'll start trying to straighten it back out. So you've got to kind of keep in mind everything you're trying to accomplish. Make notes if you need to. I've more than once found that a good solid notebook can be your best friend. And I'm noticing here, it's like we don't have a whole lot of room to get the rounding very nice right here at the bottom, but once we get the legs in place, that'll be a lot easier to address. Right now it's a little bit on the tricky side. So I think we're at a pretty good spot to just kind of take one last glimpse over here, see what's lining up, see what's not, make the necessary adjustments. I mean, I've pulled her hips out a little bit, so I may want to clean that up. Of course, a fast and easy way to do that would be to turn on proportional editing, and then I can just push and pull stuff. Proportional editing can really save your life as a modeler.
It is a really nice tool in Blender as well.
Yeah, so we can pull things out here a little bit. I'm not so stressed about the shoulders right now. And yeah, that's a soft selection tool. That's with the O key in Blender. And then you can use your mouse wheel to control its overall radius of effect.
Just don't forget to turn it off.
Yes, don't forget to turn it off.
Because it will bite you. And I know that sounds like some of the more patronizing advice.
Well,
But it really will bite you.
Yeah, sometimes
well,
advice...
I'm going to turn it on and turn it off again.
Yeah, sometimes advice needs to be a little patronizing. It's terrible, but it happens. I could probably start to pull some of these a little more forward. And you can see I'm just trying to outline where the side of the hip comes into play here.
Hmm.
And, I mean, that actually exposes some other decisions that I need to make in terms of how geometry flows across the underside of the bottom there. So I'm not going to overdo it just now. We're going to save that for some decisions to be made when we start modeling the leg. I'll probably end up having to rethink quite a bit of how the geometry flows across this surface, but it won't be a big deal. It's just we're kind of running out of time now. Okay, so I think this is a good enough place to put our work on hold. We got our image places in place. We've got some basis for the torso. And I think now would be a good time for you guys to get your models up to this point in between now and the next class. Of course, don't be afraid to continue working. If you want to go a little bit further, like maybe do a save as and see if you can attack maybe another part of the body, and just see where you go and see where my methods take us in the next class. Of course, you can do that if you want to, or just model something else entirely. Maybe restart and redo the entire torso, or grab another set of image planes for another character and see about modeling that. You have a lot of different options, especially as a member sponsor here on 3D Buzz, because we have so many different projects that are available for you to follow along with. You can have all kinds of fun with that. In the meantime, though, that is going to wrap up our discussion for today. I want to thank everybody for joining in with this webinar, and I will catch you all next week for the next class. Take care, everyone.
Bye, guys.